Hello and welcome back. And have you ever heard that expression, look after the pennies and the pounds take care of themselves? Well, that is kind of the whole focus of today's video. Today I want to talk you through 8 ways in which you can reduce the power consumption of your NAS in your home or business environment and therefore end up that resulting in saving a bit of money there on the electricity bill. This is another video in my series of videos where I'm talking about ways in which you can lower your power consumption on different NASs. So far in this series we've been testing different NAS architectures, some of which have obviously already been published, and how that translated into local currencies and how much it would actually cost you to run these systems per day, week, month, or even years. And in today's video, as mentioned, I'm going to go through a bunch of different ways in which you can cut that bill down a little bit. But before we go any further, a few disclaimers. Number one, I am well aware that all of the things I'm going to recommend you today to try out to save energy consumption on your NAS are going to make very, very small impacts. None of these are going to make a huge splash on your energy bill where you suddenly look at it and go, whoa. This is all about saving those pennies because the pounds take care of themselves. And ultimately, it's about making small changes early on that then slowly rack up over the days, weeks, months, and years. So do bear that in mind when looking at all of these points. Another thing I want you to bear in mind is I think it would be near enough impossible to take on board all 8 of these suggestions, some of which are very obvious, some of which are not quite so obvious, but I think it would be impossible to add all 8 of these. And also I'm sure there are ones that I've not even thought of, and if we can come up with more in the comments with your help, maybe we'll make another video. But for now, let's go through those 8 things you can do to start saving energy consumption on your NAS and therefore save you a bit of the old cash. Scheduled on and off. A lot of users actually use this in the last year or so because a lot of the NAS brands have been making a point of being quite loud about this, either on their respective marketing platforms or even a lot of their own respective YouTube channels, because it is a feature that NASs have had for a long time, but very few users even knew it existed or are actually taking advantage of it. Now, what a scheduled on off is it's kind of counter to the whole 24/7 NAS access thing. But what you do is you can do a setting in individual NAS brands. Again, QNAP, Synology, TerraMaster here, they've all got that. And you go into the settings, you can have the system power itself down for certain periods of time. So say, for example, you know you're not going to access the NAS during the middle of the night. Maybe you've got surveillance cameras, so bear that in mind. But maybe you don't plan on using the NAS over the night. You can actually have the system turn itself off at, say, 10 PM and turn itself back on at 6 AM. And again, you're talking about a third of a day when the system's not in operation. And the same goes if you're only going to utilize it for multimedia and backups for a small area of the day where you know you're going to be there. Maybe you come home from work and you just want to sit on the sofa and watch telly. You can adjust those hours accordingly to your needs. And scheduled on off of a NAS, although, once again, it is something you're going to have to stay on top of because if your routine changes, therefore, you might need access to the NAS when you can't. Still, nonetheless, it's a very useful feature to have that we'll touch onto a couple of other features later on you may find useful. This is another relatively recent thing where you could actually adjust how long it takes before the drives inside the NAS system decide to go into hibernation. When you fully populate these devices with hard drives or SSDs, they have their own power settings, generally referred to as active, idle and standby, and those last 2 do change places depending on which data sheet you're looking at. Now, when drives are in access, that means the read and write activity is happening, or they're just ready to go, just sat there ready to be picked up. These drives consume more power, either because of the physical architecture and the build of the drive, something we'll touch on later, or simply that the drives are being accessed and working in communication with the CPU and the other hardware inside the system. So you can actually go into the settings of a number of these different NASs. I'm going to show you, hopefully on screen, Synology there, and when you go in, you can actually decrease how long the drives will wait for to go into idle. Generally, the setting is between 20 and 30 minutes, depending on the drive. You can set it to as low as 5 minutes if you choose, for the drives to sit there and wait and go, nope, nothing's coming, go into idle mode and start saving that power. Once again, very small savings, but once you work it out across many, many drives over a longer length of time, these things can add up. Another not new feature that no, is not occupied or utilised anywhere near as much as I would have anticipated, but Wake on LAN. Now, Wake on LAN, or WOL, is the means for the system to, when it's not used for a period of time, go into an idle mode where it goes into incredibly low powered use and it's just waiting to be communicated with. And via Wake on LAN, you can go ahead and turn the device on via a remote device. And again, this can be via your mobile, or there are other third-party tools and first-party tools for desktop clients and mobile you can utilize to wake the system up when you need it. This kind of works really well as a viable alternative to scheduled on-off for users that want to have that larger period of inactivity, but at the same time want to have an option for sporadic ad hoc access outside of those registered schedule hours. And again, very small savings overall, but this is a much more fluid alternative to scheduled on-off, which will allow you to power the system on and off as needed. Now, this one is probably going to bring the contrarians out there in the comments. So again, don't be surprised if in the comments I get a lot of debate over this, but there is sort of a middle ground in between that we can go for. But when it comes to network attached storage devices, one of the earliest obvious ways you can make a saving in terms of power consumption is swapping out traditional hard drives for SSDs. Now, before you go any further, yes, I am well aware that SSDs cost more than hard drives, and therefore any saving you might think you might be making on electricity more than likely might be going directly into those SSDs. I get it, it's a valid point, but there is a grey area. The price of SSDs and hard drives is nowhere near as polarised as it once was several years ago. Indeed, a 1 TB drive is now only around 2 to 2.5 times the cost of a 1 TB SSD. Yes, SSDs have still yet to hit the capacity limit of hard drives, which are now hitting on 22 terabytes right now. And also SSDs, there is the question of durability with regular write on there, but still nonetheless, if you go for SSDs, the power consumption on SSDs is significantly lower. And on top of that, they get the job done a lot faster while utilising less power and result in the system being cooler because of their lower temperature in average use, and overall, the system as a whole consuming a lot less power. Again, not straight away will you see any savings differences, and of course it does require a little bit more investment on the media on the outset, but there is an argument there that having SSDs instead of hard drives over an extended period of time will result in drops in energy consumption, and then overall, on balance at the end of the day, a saving overall on your lecky bill. Now, this next one is another, seesaw debatable point here, but I think there is arguments a little bit stronger than our previous one. But when it comes to populating your device and you're thinking about the overall capacity you need, you do make more of a saving in energy consumption if you go for larger drives. If you were to go for a 4 TB drive and get 2 of these instead of an 8 TB drive singular, the result will be that those 2 4 TB drives will consume more power on aggregate. Now, you're going to have to factor things in, of course, such as RAID, when you've got multiple drives there, to make sure you've got a safety net, something that by its very definition does require multiple drives in its arrays. But you do find that if you can go for a larger hard drive in capacity rather than going for the same capacity across multiple drives, you will make a saving in power consumption overall. Now, it is not as cut and dry as you might like, because larger capacity drives, although they do have certain features built in to assist that lower energy consumption there, such as using helium, which results in a lower drag factor on the individual platters inside spinning, and therefore less resistance and less power utilization, it has to be said that significantly higher drive capacities have more platters inside. A hard drive has these little disks inside that are being read from, and the larger capacities get to where they are in capacity thanks to thinner platters being used inside. That's another way in which helium is useful there. But also, the more platters you've got, the more spinning and the more power consumed. So yes, going for the larger capacity drives will result in most cases of a lower power consumption compared to individual drives, but say for example in the case of these 2 drives where we have one 7-platter drive and we have one 3-platter drive, those extra platters need to be factored in too, because that power consumption will mean that the singular drive with more platters is going to use more than 2 of the drives with fewer platters there. So it's not an exact science, but just bear in mind again, larger capacity rather than individual drives to meet that same capacity generally leads to lower power consumption. Just keep an eye on those platters. This next point is hugely dependent on the kind of user you are and the kind of tasks you need your NAS to perform, but there are a lot of more cost-effective NASs arriving on the scene that not only arrive with a lower price point compared to more premium fully featured devices, but also far more energy efficient processors. These are known as ARM based processors. These take instructions that are being delivered to and from them to get jobs done within the system and then compresses them in order for the CPU to have to utilize less hardware resources and power to get the job done. Now, there are a lot of cost-effective NASs on the market that arrive with ARM-based processors inside, which will use significantly less power. This device here, the TS133 from QNAP, has got a 36-watt external PSU. And remember, that's a maximum throughput, not an average use number there. But that is thanks to the quad-core ARM-based processor inside. Now, bear in mind, if you go for more impressive or more aggressive processes inside, such as transcoding or virtual machines or highly graphical enabled processes, ARM-based processors will either use significantly more power to get those jobs done or will simply not be able to get those jobs done at all when compared to x86 64-bit processors from the likes of AMD or Intel. But still, nonetheless, if the things you need to do with the NAS are general throughput, they are localized or even remote backups, which aren't going to be too heavy duty, or the system you're utilizing doesn't require any kind of DLNA, any transcoding, because all your multimedia concerns are DLNA and localized via UPnP and stuff like that, then chances are an ARM-based processor may still do the job for you and not only result in a good saving in day one in buying the equipment to start with, but also a lower power consumption, and once again that electricity bill getting a little bit smaller. This is another one of those points that isn't going to be tremendously surprising, but if you're looking at a solution to save power and not be too concerned with your power consumption and the electricity bill, try to avoid rack mount solutions. Now, rack mount solutions, they are efficient. They arrive with, I would say, more expansive and more aggressive hardware in their larger components and larger configurations, but there's still no avoiding it. That because of the architecture and the design and the way they are built for the areas and scenarios they are designed to be deployed in, they are more power hungry. You can get a 4-bay NAS like this, the RS422 Plus, which is already quite an efficient little 4-bay rack mount from Synology there, and if you compare it against the S1522 Plus, which is a 5-bay with more memory and more CPU and the same CPU, what you find is this system has a bigger PSU, and it requires that bigger PSU because it may need more power to keep this system ventilated. Rack mount solutions have more cooling fans overall, although they are of course the same number as some Synology NASs, just a difference in scale. But because of the aggressive airflow through the system without utilising side panels due to rack cabinets, you tend to find that rack mount solutions have got bigger PSUs and they have a larger power consumption generally overall when they are in operation compared to likewise hardware configurations in desktop solutions. So if you're on the fence about buying a desktop or a rack mount solution and they're comparable, when it comes to power consumption, you will almost always find that a desktop solution will consume less power. Now, this last point, I'm well aware of the irony or the hypocrisy of me saying the following when I'm surrounded by a row of NASs here, but try to make sure when you deploy a NAS that you put it in a cool, clear airflow environment. Now, why is that? None of these are plugged in, by the way, it's fine. when you do deploy a NAS, you may notice all of these NASs from different scales and different configurations have big old fans there. They need to keep things as cool as possible. When a NAS is in operation, not only does the media, hard drive or SSD get quite warm, but so do the internal components, the transistors, all the way down to the CPU and the memory. Indeed, if you're using SSD caching, even more so. Now, for a system to be on 24/7, NASs like to be as cool as possible to maintain that level of efficiency. And with the internal temperature sensors, when the system gets a little hotter, they start spinning up the fans internally. They may even throttle some hardware services as well, but that's less related to this. Now, NASs, desktop at least, tend to have ventilation on either side. They have ventilation at the bottom and they have ventilation there at the back. Sometimes there's a difference of whether you'll get one that's got trays and vents on the front or a covered panel there on the front of the system. Why am I telling you all this? If you deploy a NAS in a very confined manner, maybe in a cupboard with a door closed behind it, or in an area where there isn't lots of airflow around the system, or like near a radiator or near a window getting direct sunlight on it, these systems will get hotter, and therefore the system will try to compensate against that heat to maintain the efficient temperature, and therefore the system will be higher in power consumption, not just with the fans to maintain temperature, but also because the internal components work at their best when they are cool. So until the system is able to maintain that decent working temperature internally and that ambient temperature, the components inside are going to be less efficient. They are going to use more power to get the average job done because they're being sluggish because of the added heat. So make sure when you deploy your NAS that, again, you put it in a cool environment with plenty of ventilation around it to allow the active airflow to pass through and around it. And that is the last one of the 8 things I would recommend you try out if you want to make significant overall power savings on your NAS. Once again, these are all small things. None of them on their own is going to save you that much money, to be frank. But using 2 or 3 of these together over time will make an impact. And if you are concerned about the cost of a NAS running 24/7, then maybe take some of these on board. But thank you so much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this. If you have, visit the link in the description to the article for this video. It breaks down all the things I've spoken about with a few more examples, and if you guys come up with recommendations in the comments that I've not thought of, I'll add those to that article, or maybe make another video if you have enough examples down the line. Click like if you've enjoyed the video, subscribe if you want to learn more, and other than that, I will see you next time.